Welcome back to Heroic Book Adventures. I'm Steve, and today we're going to take a look at Herbert Reed's The Green Child. He wrote this in 1935, and it was his only novel. He did write other nonfiction books. I guess he was like an architecture critic, and that's what he was known for. But I feel like he could have probably wrote a lot more stuff like this because this is one of the most unique books I have ever read. I don't want to give away too much, but I do kind of have to explain how this story is structured so you can understand what I'm talking about and determine for yourself whether it's something you would want to read or not. So the book's divided into three parts. In the first part, we meet the main character, Olivero, who for the past 25 years has been the president of a small South American country. Wanting to escape from that life and go back to England where he was born and raised, he fakes his own assassination so he can sneak off back to England. So once he gets back there, he's just walking around the town, seeing how much has changed since he was a kid and everything. And he ends up running into this woman who has greenish skin. And he remembers that right before he had left as a young man, this green child had showed up. And he's like, oh, that must be the woman that was the green child. Now here it is 30 years later, and here she is. So through the story and everything, he follows her, and they walk into this pool of water, which ends up being a portal back into her own world. So that's the end of the first part. The second part tells the story of his life from leaving England and then the 30 years following, where he got to South America, fought in the revolution to overtake the dictator that was there, and eventually became the leader of that country. And it was kind of strange because that entire second part, which was a pretty large section of the book, could have not even been there and you wouldn't even noticed it because it just doesn't really have much effect on the rest of the story. But that being said, it was a pretty good story. So I didn't mind it like that. And then the third part goes back to where the first part ended, and they walk into that pool of water and get transported back to the Green Child's homeland, which is a subterranean fantasy world. And it gets very philosophical in that point too in the third. So it's so strange because the first part of the book reads almost like an old classic, like you're reading Frankenstein or something, kind of literary fiction in a way. And then the second part is historical fiction. And then the third part is like a very strange fantasy with philosophical elements into it. So I don't know. I really don't have anything else to compare it to. I would think that fans of literary and historical fiction will actually probably enjoy this one more than fantasy fans do. I would say that the only fantasy readers that will enjoy this will be ones that like being challenged, because there are no familiar fantasy tropes in this. This is just way different than anything else in the fantasy genre. So it's kind of hard to give it a rating because I don't have anything else to compare it to. Uh, well, I guess I mentioned Frankenstein. That's kind of a good comparison because you go into that one expecting a horror about a monster, but then you end up getting uh, a philosophical discussion about what it means to be human. And it's the same thing with this, where you go into it expecting to have a fantasy story, but instead you get like a biography of this man's life and a discussion on what leading a good life means. So when I'm giving numerical ratings, I'm not dividing it up into like its literariness and its how profound it is or anything. I'm just simply giving a number based on how much did I enjoy reading it. So if I was giving a grade on its literary qualities, this would be very high up there. And if you like that sort of thing, read The Green Child, because this truly is one of a kind, at least amongst things I've ever read. There's nothing else like this, and its literary quality is superb. If you're a fantasy reader, again, are you going to be okay with being challenged with something really, really different? Only you can determine that. And I just hope that I've given you enough information here that you can decide that for yourself. For me, I would say a solid 8 out of 10. Part of me wants to give it higher because of just how excellent it is. But then there's also parts of it that I thought were like, well, like I said, that entire middle section didn't even relate to the rest of the story, but it was still pretty good. So I'm jumping in between my head. It's one of those that I'm giving an 8 out of 10, but it could have actually been higher too. And depending on what type of reader you are, you may find this to be excellent. So I will see you green tinted heroes on our next South American adventure.